Very much, Commissioner. We'll start with a round of group speakers. Mr. Sarvamaa, who is coming from Helsinki.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. And thank you, especially Commissioner Hahn. I really want to thank you for your commitment and devotion to this issue of greatest importance. As we know, the Parliament has set out its position on application of the rule of law conditionality regulation already in the plenary resolution in December 2020. First of all, we want to make clear that the Council conclusions are legally superfluous, and the European Parliament, as a co-legislator, asserts the primacy of the regulation. This is entirely consistent with the case law. The applicability of this regulation cannot be subject to adoption of any guidelines, as the text agreed is sufficiently clear. Second, we expect the Commission, as the guardian of the treaties, to ensure that the regulation is fully applicable from the date agreed, as you said, Commissioner Hahn, January 1st, and we will use all tools in our disposal to make sure this happens. And third, the Parliament will vigorously defend the validity of the regulation and will request an expedited procedure in the European Court of Justice. And we know, by the way, that several member states will stand behind us in this process. However, we will contribute to the drafting of the guidelines to ensure that they respect the will of the co-legislators. And all in all, I do believe that the Commission is our ally in our common fight for stronger rule of law in Europe. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege. Und wir fahren.
Thank you very much. We'll continue from the room with Ms. Guardia-Sabal Rubial for the Alliance of Socialists and Democrats.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, we're aware that just 2.5 months have passed since this mechanism came into force, conditioning European funds and the rule of law. But there are high expectations. This is one of the most important and most awaited regulations of our term, and we know that it was complicated to get an acceptable agreement for all. That's why this debate is happening. As we've just heard from the previous speaker, the Council guidelines weren't needed, but they were presented. So we want to understand what's in these actual guidelines. We want to have security that the guidelines will not modify the agreement already reached by the institutions. What's in the guidelines needs to reflect what was negotiated. We also want to see how the Commission develops and executes the regulation, so not just in the guidelines. Then, what about the portal which is used by the Commission to communicate with end beneficiaries or other information that is put on that portal? So we want all of this information because it's our role to scrutinize you, but also as legislators we want security. As you said at the end of your speech, we want to be certain that this will be an applicable and efficient regulation, and we would like to have that additional information from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll continue now with the chair of the Renew Europe group, Mr. Cholos. You have the floor.
Sorry.
Madame la Présidente, Monsieur le...
Madam President, Commissioner, I'm going to be very frank. We asked for this debate because we are assured that the regulation that we've negotiated together, Parliament with the Council and alongside the Commission, is a regulation that can be a good one. But it's only a good one if it will be applied. The decision has been taken, and as such, this needs to be applied as of the 1st of January this year. We have waited too long for the Court of Justice to sort out the situation of the rule of law in countries in the EU, or to catch up with those slippages of autocratic movements in Europe, or think that the EU is just a cash point to dish out money. The essential aspect now is that the Commission start to apply this regulation, starts to look at the cases, because there are indeed a number of cases in several member states, look at those cases, go through them and make sure that this legislation be effective because it is applied. If that does not happen, then the Parliament will use all the tools at its disposal to make sure that European legislation is respected, that the Commission, as is set out in the treaties, applies this regulation. We know that guidelines can be useful, clarification can be useful, but legislation, as far as I'm aware, applies as it has been decided on by the legislators, and that's what we expect to see from the European Commission, without waiting, without any kind of hesitancy beyond what the Council might say to the Commission. The Commission is completely independent and has to use that independence. The Parliament is here to keep guard, make sure that the rules are applied, because that's the only way we can gain credibility. For too long we've been talking about the rule of law. We, or certain politicians, believe that they're being attacked personally. Certain member states believe that they are being attacked specifically. With this mechanism, we now have an opportunity to show that the rule of law and European values apply to everybody, all member states, without any kind of political discrimination. And it's only in this way that this legislation will gain that value, and that is why we've asked for this debate. That also we would like to put forward a resolution for it to be clear that the European Parliament has requested this mechanism. We've got this mechanism, but the European Parliament will also make sure that this is applied, because it's only once it's applied that we can actually judge its efficiency. Thank you.
Vielen herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much. Moving on. We now have a representative of the Identity and Democracy Group, Mr. Rivière. You have the floor.
Merci, Madame la.
Thank you, President. Here, everyone is happy with listing the good and bad points and accusing countries of behaving badly. But rule of law is rather specific. We throw a curtain over the poor intention of this mechanism. Rather than hiding behind law, why not accept that this is a political text, which is aiming to make Poland and Hungary cede to your view of progressivism. This Parliament wants to put anti-democratic pressure and scandalous pressure on governments which have been elected with very broad majorities. What it's trying to do is impose ways of life, new cultures, a new type of society that's deprived of its roots, and countries without identity or borders. This mechanism is going to allow the Commission to impose its identity regardless of the cultures or histories of member states or choices made by their people. And its arrogance knows no limits. Yes, people's sovereignty shouldn't be focused on individuals, and this is a classical problem which justifies the existence of judges, but nor can it lead to the liquidation of people's sovereignty, particularly in their primordial right to define themselves as a people. You can only, you must leave people a traditional way of defining themselves. You want to have a borderless, immigration-focused EU, and you haven't even changed that during the COVID pandemic.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Green Group, now we have Ms. Reinke. You have the floor.
Danke, Frau Vizepräsidentin. Dear colleagues, dear Commissioner, I think this Parliament has been abundantly clear about what it expects from the Commission. When a legal act is adopted and enters into force, it should be used in applicable situations by the Commission, especially when it deals with such crucial matters as the functioning of democracy. But it unfortunately seems to me that the Commission follows a different logic, and that is to be very, very cautious with any activities that could potentially further escalate existing conflicts with member states. The story goes like this, that if the Commission acts, for example, by activating the rule of law conditionality, it would fuel eventually an anti-European sentiment in countries like, let's say, Hungary or Poland. When actually, when you look at the situation, we have gotten to a point where the opposite is true. If the European Commission fails to act in defense of rule of law and fundamental rights, there will be a rise in anti-European sentiment. But not by the usual suspects, but by the people who have for years defended the European Union in these countries, who have stood up for the primacy of EU law, the judges, the prosecutors, the lawyers who have upheld the treaties, the NGOs who have defended fundamental rights and democracy, the people who demonstrated for their rights in the streets, the many who have counted on the assurances of that the European Union is an area of freedom, justice and security, and that the Commission will indeed defend fundamental rights and democracy. Listen to these people, Mr. Commissioner, not only the governments in the respective countries. And lastly, Mr. Commissioner, to me, two statements that you have made in your speech seem to be contradicting. On the one hand, you say that objective reasons to activate the regulation will be used from now on. But on the other hand, you also say that there is a waiting period in which you will not act until the ECJ has made an assessment. And to me, only one of these statements can be true. So again, this Parliament has been clear. Use all legal acts, all instruments at hand, and use them now. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin.
Thank you very much, Ms. Reinke. We now continue with the representative of the European Conservatives and Reformist Groups, Mr. Brudzinski. You have the floor.
Wollten Sie sich... Please, I couldn't hear you. Please.
Bardzo dziękuję. Warunkowość wydatkowania środków.
Thank you very much. Linking rule of law to European funds needs to be based on concrete, objective and proportional grounds. This should not allow for an political instrumentalization. The application of this mechanism cannot create a situation where we rely on emotions, and that is unfortunately often the case in this Parliament. The application of this mechanism cannot lead to greater control or checks over the member states, because these are issues that fall under other provisions of the treaty. As for Poland and this mechanism, Poland considers that this mechanism must protect the budget, but it is against this kind of mechanism. Yet Poland has adopted the budget. Now, as regards the primacy of the provisions of the treaty, that's what we support. And these are also the conclusions of the European Council. These conclusions speak about the different conditions which must be fulfilled by the European institutions, including the European Commission, in order to implement this mechanism. These are strict conditions. For instance, as regards the implementation of this mechanism, there first needs to be a publication of the provisions which are going to be published by the Commission, but which are going to be negotiated. I stress this, negotiated and approved by the Member States. We also need to await the ruling of the European Court of Justice. Poland, like other Member States, wants to make the most of the opportunity afforded to it, which is to submit a request to the court.
Bitte schön, Herr Kollege Fest.
I give the floor to Mr. Fest.
Herr Abgeordneter Fest.
Mr. Fest, I understood your question, but you know that, as is always the case in the House. We don't allow leaders of the groups to speak. So I'm treating everyone equally. But we can say to colleagues that and tell them that they should not exceed their speaking time. But you see that it was the same treatment for the Green MEP and for the ECR MEP. So I think there is a bit of an advantage. There has been an advantage in this round, but from now on I shall be very strict in controlling speaker time. Now, without losing any further time, I hand over to Mr. Papadimoulis, who is speaking on behalf of the left. He is speaking to us from Athens.
Thank you, Chair. Back in November, the European Parliament agreed with the Council on an important regulation that defends European values of democracy and the rule of law. In December, the Council itself basically decided to follow the blackmail it had suffered from certain member states, and they did not defend the signature, and the Commission went to delays and the weakening of the regulation. Mr. Hahn, you said many things, but you did not answer a single question. The ban of abortions in Poland from the government, is this going against the rule of law? What have you done to enforce this regulation that is valid from January 1st against this violation of the rule of law? The large majority of MEPs and the Parliament wants you to take action if you want to really defend the rule of law and implement a regulation that has entered into force and cannot be blocked by the Council because it has no legislative powers. So you need to take action finally. Thank you.
Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much. From Athens, we continue in the room with colleague Rookmaker for 1 minute.
Dear Chair, dear Commissioner, dear members. If you buy commitment, you get resentment. It makes no sense to force EU member states into compliance of EU values and the rule of law. Withdrawal of funds can and will only hurt the wrong people. It will create tension and can release nationalistic sentiments. It can even lead to member states leaving the Union. When rights are violated by a member state, any person can turn to the national court. And if this doesn't resolve the issue, ultimately one can go to the European Court of Justice. The spending of EU funds must be accounted for and used in a responsible way. Transparency is key. But political issues should not be used to delay recovery projects. If the duration of a project goes up, cost will go up, and the commitment to the European will go down. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin.
Thank you very much, colleague. We continue with Mr. Zadowski from Prague.
Do you know who is the best MEP and chair in the European Parliament? The one who doesn't extend and create delays in our proceedings. And I think that time is also of essence in this very debate. And this is the reason why EPP strongly endorsed keeping the essentials, and that's the rule of law and rules in member states. There is a key, this is a key condition for using subsidies in the period 2021 to 27, thanks to work of our group. This was possible, and this reflects also the requirements of citizens. 77% of EU citizens believes that adherence to democratic values should be a clear condition for reception of European funds. This has been a long-term process, and we found a compromise. So despite certain disagreements with member states, in the end, the mechanism stayed unchanged and is required and implemented from 1st of January. Our position was clear. We have to fulfill our promises and defend the rights of EU citizens.
Thank you very much. We continue with Ms. Barley.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The regulation on the rule of law conditionality came into force on 1st of January 2021. This Parliament fought very hard for this. It's a very unusual legislation procedure. The proposal came from the Commission, the Council and the Parliament negotiate, and it's now come into force. It's very clear when it needs to be applied. There were guidelines that were adopted. The ECJ, however, has been called in. But this is a quite unique situation. You are no longer observing your role as guardian of the treaties, which you always insist on as the Commission. Why? Because the European Council has decided something. Now, according to Article 15 of the treaties, the European Council is not a co-legislator. We have a law that is in force. This is not an academic exercise. It's not about words. It's not about interpretation. It's about people of flesh and blood. As long as this regulation is not applied, I mean, the example I've seen with, I've spoken with Polish legal experts and legal personnel who've been sacked, females who've been sacked simply for having asserted the rule of law. They now can't see their children anymore. That's not something they're going to get back 2 years' time, maybe once they've decided how it should be interpreted, the things that we've decided on. So get active and do it now.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin.
Thank you very much, colleague. We now hear from Ms. Che.
September 2020, the wife and son of a Fidesz MP won 170,000 euros for tourism developments on the family's own estate. October 21, 2020, the EU gave 100,000 euros for a camping site for children. Reporters found a resort for lavish parties thrown by the local Fidesz mayor's son. January 21, 2021, Viktor Orban's son-in-law won 600,000 euros of agricultural subsidies. He has a proven track record of fraud, proven by the EU's own agencies. These are just some of the recent headlines from Hungary. And this is the face the European Union is showing to my constituents. That this is a cash machine for well-connected oligarchs, that the money intended to lift up regions with crippling poverty can be captured with little consequence. And the rule of law mechanism has the power to put an end to this, but it has to be implemented and enforced. And we all know that this mechanism is union law since January the 1st. So why don't we use it? No council conclusion and no backroom deal can change the law. Viktor Orban's efforts to delay the mechanism until next year's election is clearly in violation of European law. Let's not assist to them. All these years of procrastination has put the entire European project in danger. Commissioner, we have waited enough. For this Parliament, only meaningful action is necessary. We demand this from you. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank, Frau.
Thank you very much, Ms. Che. We now hear from Mr. Fest.
Ein Wort zu Ihnen. In Ihrem Taubenschlag liegen bereits zwei.
Thank you. I've already written 2 letters which I'd like answered. Please check your post box because there's some failings there. Now, Poland and Hungary are accused of breaking the rule of law. It would be good to look at Germany. Political criteria are used to establish judges. The prosecution office is not independent. The SPD, the political party, owns large swathes of the media in Germany. In Berlin, well, one could say that many trials take so long that criminals are still roaming. Then my own party is also affected. The Verfassungsschutz, the intelligence services of Germany, has already been admonished twice by the courts because the intelligence service are monitoring the alternative for Germany. And then this has been reported on by the media, which was a breach of the law. So rule of law is not faring so well in Germany. Then if we look at corona policy, there have also been violations. Colleague Probitsky has criticised this, but so have constitutional judges. So if we're talking about the rule of law mechanism, we shouldn't just look at Poland and Hungary. We should look at the concerning situation in Germany too. Thank you, Mr. Fest. The next speaker is Mr. Freund.
Thank you very much, Madam President.
When students forget to do their homework, legend has it that the dog ate it. I think the Commission equivalent of that is we're still working on the guidelines. The Commission suggested the rule of law mechanism over 3 years ago and seems to have been utterly surprised now by the entry into force on the 1st of January. It's been 3 months. We haven't seen anything of those guidelines. You still refuse to apply the law. And the governments of Poland and Hungary are creating facts on the ground. Every day we hear new news of breaches of fundamental rights, of the rule of law. New projects are awarded to the family and friends of Viktor Orban. Commissioner Hahn, I think the Parliament's equivalent of stop making cheap excuses for not doing your homework is that we will sue or censure if we have to. We will fight for the rule of law, because this is not just some school project. This is the foundation of this union that this is about. So please do this homework. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Freund. We continue now and we hear from Mr. Villalba.
Thank you, President. Colleagues, this regulation, as we all know, has no objective. Does the Commission have sufficient mechanisms to recuperate money that has been fraudulently used? And we're sending out a message that over the last 13 years there have been significant corrections in terms of fraud. Its goal is not to overcome breaches of rights by member states. There are provisions for that in the treaties. What is the real objective of this mechanism? Well, it's simply the sword of Damocles that Brussels has to hang over member states. It has no ideology other than undermining proper democracy. People are trying to defend their own traditions, and there are people saying that abortion is part of a rule of law. In Poland or in Hungary, this